guest is someone who's very kindly come in at very short notice, really responding to some, I think, important news in the US, but maybe you can tell us about that. It's David Doniger. I keep getting his title wrong, so I'm afraid I'm going to do it again. Policy Director, Climate Center at the National Resources Defense Council. Natural Resources. You see, I've done it again. Sorry. I apologize to you. We should have Jeffrey Allen, my colleague, who's American, to do this, and in fact I think we'll do it much more together.
Defense with an S.
Defense with an S, quite right too. Okay, well perhaps Jeff, you could just kick us off, or perhaps you should. We should ask you, what is it that's happened in the US that is so interesting in terms of greenhouse gas classification, as it were?
Well, yesterday the Environmental Protection Agency made an official determination of something that seems quite straightforward, that the pollution that causes global warming, carbon dioxide, the other gases, is dangerous to public health, is dangerous to the environment. Now, of course, anyone who has followed the science has known this as a scientific fact, so there's not really any new scientific findings there. But this is an important official step because it's part of the process under the Clean Air Act for regulating the pollution, for introducing standards to control the pollution that causes global warming. And the Obama administration has picked up the ball from the previous administration, during which time they had refused, the Bush administration refused to act under the Clean Air Act. We and a number of states had gone to the courts, all the way to the American Supreme Court, to get a ruling that the Clean Air Act does in fact cover the pollution that causes global warming, just like the pollution that causes other kinds of health and environmental impacts. So the Supreme Court said if the government concludes that the pollution, CO2 and so on, is dangerous, then EPA must regulate some of the sources. So when the Obama administration came in, they moved very quickly to collect the science and make the proposed determination last April that there is this danger. And they took public comment for about 6 months, as is required, sorted through 450,000 comments, and have produced the most up-to-date review of all the scientific arguments, rebuttals of skeptic arguments, affirmations of the science, and reach this official conclusion that carbon dioxide harms our health because the warming leads to worsened smog, it leads to more severe storms, it leads to killer heat waves, it leads to the spread of infectious diseases, whole set of health hazards, as well as the underlying harms to the environment. Now, what's in the works is standards to immediately to reduce the pollution that comes from new cars and SUVs and trucks. By 2016, they'll be phased in. By 2016, the new vehicles in the United States will have 30% less greenhouse gas emissions than they had a couple of years ago. And this is tied as well with increasing the fuel economy. So this is a big advance. The next steps involve measures to control the emissions of new power plants, expanded power plants, new and expanded factories, which have to go through case-by-case review to make sure when they build or expand that they're using the best available control technology for other pollutants. When the vehicle rules are issued in March, that will trigger a requirement that the best available control technology be used as well for carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Long story, but what the EPA is doing is using the Clean Air Act, the law that's already on the books, to take the first big bites out of global warming pollution. And at the same time, they're working to get new legislation from Congress and working here in Copenhagen to get a new treaty.
Maybe you could just explain a little bit the difference between this EPA ruling that's come out yesterday and that law that's going through Congress? Because I think a lot of people are going to get confused. I'm sure there's already television spots saying, this is the EPA taking over from the Senate, or, the Obama administration legislating from on high. Is that the case? Is that what's happening? Or are these different things that serve different purposes?
Well, the United States has had a Clean Air Act for 40 years. And for 40 years, it's had the language in it that requires the Environmental Protection Agency, when it learns of the dangers of a new pollutant, to designate that pollutant as dangerous and go on to regulate its emissions from cars, from factories, from power plants. This authority has never been used before this year for CO2 and the other pollutants that cause global warming. But this is being done under a law that Congress wrote years ago and is already on the books. So it's not as though the administration is just making this up. They're implementing a law that Congress passed quite some time ago. Now, I say this law can be used to take the first big bites out of global warming pollution. It allows for standards that are going to make vehicles 30% cleaner than they were. You can do similar things with some of the power plant and big factory type sources. It does take a while. It takes a number of years to do this. And you don't have, under the Clean Air Act, the broad cap on all of the major sources. You don't have a cap on 85% of the U.S. emissions. That's what's being proposed in the new legislation. And the new legislation is an amendment to the Clean Air Act. It would be the Clean Air Act 4.0. We've had 3 major modernizations, improvements of the Clean Air Act over the last 40 years. This would be the 4th one. And it would bring this cap and trade program into the Clean Air Act alongside the existing authorities. At the same time, Congress will probably modify or tailor some of those existing authorities, but they're adopting the new cap to reduce emissions steadily over the next 30, 40 years, every year. At least this is the legislation the House has passed, and we believe we can get through the Senate next year. And that will be an addition, an improvement, an expansion of the Clean Air Act.
And I think I'm right in saying you were one of the lawyers that helped bring this case to the Supreme Court. So, yes, you must feel rather happy and satisfied about that.
Yes, well, it's been a long slog. We had 8 wasted years in the last administration. But since the court victory, which was in 2007, well, at first President Bush said this is the new law of the land, and he was setting off to implement it. But that moment of rationality lasted only a few months, and then they went back to doing nothing as usual. When the new administration, the Obama team, came in, within the very first week, they announced that they were going to set the wheels in motion to give California the authority that the Bush administration had denied to enforce its own vehicle emission standards. And then later, in the spring, the Obama team managed what we call the Clean Car Peace Treaty, where an agreement was reached between the states, California, other states, the administration, the auto companies, and the environmental community on these standards, which when they're issued, the auto industry is going to support them. They're already on record now as supporting them. What they said couldn't be done, they now say they can do. And we have the hopes that for the years after 2016, those standards will be improved again. Big changes have been implemented already and are underway through the EPA, through the Energy Department, through the Transportation Department. A lot of progress being made in the U.S. But again, you can take a big first bite out of global warming pollution with the existing laws to cap and reduce the emissions steadily by 83% over the next 40 years. You need more tools in an amended law, and that's what the comprehensive climate and energy legislation would do.